Hi everyone, I'm super excited to host Sarel, CEO and co-founder of TradeStack. Thanks a lot for being on the show.
Thanks for great to be here and happy to be sharing my story with the AEC community.
Amazing. Take us back to your college days and till this date. What would be your top career highlights?
Yeah, sure. So I think since I've been at a really early stage, I realized I have a liking in mathematics and science. And so that sort of led me to study engineering down at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. But actually, ironically, when I joined my first employer, a construction company, almost on day one, I realized I'm not going to be an engineer for the rest of my life. So I actually studying towards a bachelor's of commerce in law. But during the early days of studying engineering, it did give me an amazing opportunity to work back then as a teenager when I was 19 on a construction site. I was working on this major bridge construction site in Cape Town, which I would never forget. And obviously, I'd learned a lot as a young, aspiring engineer at the time. So, had spent 6 years at a tier one contractor in South Africa across different roles and across different functions in the business. Had an amazing opportunity to travel the African continent from east to west and southern Africa from our base in Johannesburg in South Africa. And yeah, after a really good stint in construction, decided to move to the UK, pursued an MBA at Oxford as I realized that I wanted to pursue more entrepreneurial ventures. So yeah, I joined an early stage prop tech startup called Souk. I joined them really early, and sort of 4 years after that was just thrilling. It was my first, full-time role in a startup, and had the role of a generalist, and really just post MBA tried to do everything I could and learn so much about how to operate within a startup environment. I was in my sort of sector of confidence around property development and construction. And yeah, just had a really great time with the team. And then basically realized that there's this huge opportunity opening up with AI in construction. And so that's again when I shifted my focus towards TradeStack. And I'm sure we'll get into the details of that. So those are some of the highlights, from starting to study towards civil engineering, which I believe you studied as well, towards where I am today.
It's an amazing journey with like law, MBA, so many different perspective and again relate to that generalist part. I was wondering like in this phase, what was the toughest decision you had to make?
Yeah, I suppose the move from South Africa to the UK and to invest a lot of my personal time and money into pursuing an MBA, it was a big bet to make, and I felt at the time it was the right time for me in my career to pursue that. It comes at a really big cost, not just the opportunity cost of being outside of the workforce, but obviously in terms of like actual direct funding. And it was actually quite a huge disappointment when midway through the MBA course at Oxford, the pandemic hit. And now, obviously, the world had been and everyone had been affected by the pandemic in all sorts of ways. In this specific context, there was some level of disappointment because my time at Oxford had been cut short, or at least the experience that I was hoping for. But nonetheless, it opened up the opportunities that I was trying to pursue. And in a matter of fact, it perhaps boosted those opportunities in the sense that the early stage prop tech Souk that I joined had benefited in a way from the pandemic. It opened up the market for way more opportunities, and so my role at Souk, was perhaps even more exciting than it would have been otherwise. So it all turned out okay in the end. And looking back, I obviously would have done it, would do it again. But I think if I had known the pandemic was going to hit, then obviously I think my considerations would have been different. And I think here it's one of the things that I'm experiencing more and more at this stage of my career is something that Steve Jobs said at some graduation ceremony where he was the guest speaker. It's quite easy when looking back to connect the dots. And I'm experiencing that in my life now. At first, I wasn't quite sure whether I'm ever going back to engineering, even though I really loved it. I wasn't quite sure how all the pieces were coming together in my career. And it's just with TradeStack, it's come together, so beautifully.
That's amazing. What's the major difference you see in like the construction ecosystem in South Africa versus UK?
Yeah. Well, I think firstly, the sort of obvious thing is the size of the market. South Africa, relatively speaking, is a small market. The second thing is it's a developing market. So the sort of construction projects look very different. For example, in the UK, and in first world countries, developed countries, you already have basic infrastructure around, core power networks, rail networks, road infrastructure, and so on. There's a lot still happening on that front within South Africa. I think there's um, as a result of that, I would argue, you've had some of the most innovative engineers from South Africa, in the sense that they have, in this modern era, had to build a lot of like major infrastructure projects, like big stadiums when they hosted the World Cup, the Football World Cup, roads, and so on and so forth. And then I think the other thing is location, right? If you think about the US, well, this is probably more relevant to Europe. But when you're a tier one contractor and you want to scale, you can scale beyond your borders seamlessly, because on the other side of the channel you have Western Europe, and which has sort of similar economic environments. Whereas in South Africa, when you're based on the southern, end of Africa, your bordering countries are also developing
Mm.
countries like Zimbabwe, Botswana, and so on. So the market, your ability to expand beyond the South African borders look a bit different. And so when the pace of development in the Middle East, especially Dubai and Abu Dhabi, was picking up, the company that I'd worked for, ventured into the Middle East, to find ways to essentially expand the business. And that was the case into Western and Eastern Africa as well. So scaling growth looks a bit different. I think in terms of one, if I could sort of comment on one other dimension from a theme like BIM, there's sort of, although it's a focus, but it's less regulated than, say, in a developed world, where certain BIM standards are being regulated and enforced on contractors. So that environment looks a bit different, but that hasn't really affected, I would say, adoption. We were at a world stage, actually, some of the earlier adopters of them as a technology, and there wasn't really much of a lag on that front.
I see. I'd like to go to the early days of TradeStack. Like, how did you get the idea? How did you validate your early users?
Yeah, sure thing. So we, a few of us who had met each other through a London-based entrepreneurial network, we came together and we started exploring theses around, the technology on the one hand and the construction sector at the other. And this was really early stage, when these worlds were, you could start thinking in those terms. I suppose you could have done it a bit earlier, but this is when we did it at the end of 2023, start of 2024. And what we realized was that there's obviously a lot that we sort of figured. But one of the things that we had to acknowledge was just the one big statistic that often being quoted in construction is the sort of productivity over the past few decades. I think most people are familiar with that. And so that really raised some questions. And some people sort of look at it quite simplistic. We thought that we should really unpack that. And what we had realized is that contractors, or if you think about the nature of a construction project, it's got so many variables. It's in a different location. It's got different client requirements. And just those two things mean downstream, there are, dozens, if not hundreds of things that are different. Other things that are different are the stakeholders involved, the regulations that are at play, and so on and so forth. So this extensive degree of variability within this sector has made it quite tricky for the industry to find software solutions that really solve their problems. And so the software industry has responded by either going very niche and solve a problem for, say, HVAC installers in the south of England or within England, um, or they've gone very broad and enable their users to configure the system to their needs. Either way, I think it's fair to say that these are imperfect solutions. And so the result of that is a significant dependency on human input. So if you're running off, like, this is no criticism of any platform, but if you're running off a typical sort of platform like Procore or job management system, like Service Titan or Big Change and Simpro, the leaders in this market, there's still a lot of manual human work that need to happen. So trade and construction contractors have really been building their organizations around that. They could not have done really anything else because you do need those tools to scale. But as a result, you've also had to have humans in your team, or more of them at least, to scale. And so AI, obviously, just purely from an automation perspective, or looking at the AI automation capabilities, there's a clear match on that front. If you really go and look at what these individuals were really doing, it was things were like taking information from an email, digesting it through a set criteria, and then adding it to a job management system, or looking at WhatsApp messages and doing the same. Or if there's some trigger on the job management system, taking some other action on the suite of software sort of packages. And so that was one big realization, which is central to why TradeStack exists and the solution that we deliver in the market. I mean, there are other things that we learned that I think other construction tech founders had learned before in their life, but not all of them have been obvious, at least to us. There's this big sort of question mark around, like, what is the preference from contractors around having a single sort of platform that can solve all their problems. That theme, a lot of solutions have been built around that idea, but in reality, what you often see is a contractor using a whole suite of tools. So yeah, those are some things that we had learned, and how we thought very theoretically about this at first to decide the initial direction we were going to move into. And then we just doubled down on speaking to as many contractors in the field as possible. We were at one stage walking the streets of London to just, meet anyone that has a hard hat on and just get their perspective on things.
It reminds me of like doing things that don't scale. You just go
Hmm.
there. Yeah. And what's your proudest moment in the journey of the startup?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I would probably say it's hard to say because we're trying to be just so focused on moving forward and serving our clients with the best solution out there. But I think one moment in TradeStack's journey that's been certainly rewarding so far is that with the moment we realized that our decision to pivot the business is starting to pay off, and in fact, really pay off. And so when you're in these early stages, you can't make too many mistakes. Had we not pivoted, we could have been, we could have looked very different today. But the pivot, to sort of provide a bit more detail around that, our thesis was that if you look at like how the market is made up, you'll notice that this is true largely for across all developed markets, the US, Canada, Europe, and the UK, and Australasia, where the majority of builders or individuals, tradespeople that's working in this sector, they actually work for themselves or they form very small groups. There's a very high degree of fragmentation in this market with a very long tail. And so the idea was that let's try and capture that market and sort of work our way towards enterprise in the longer run. So for all sorts of reasons, including, willingness to pay, the compounding of time saved, and so on and so forth, that thesis didn't quite work out the way that we thought, or wasn't accurate. And so we shifted our focus towards mid-market contractors, and the solution fit, or the problem solution fit, just became so real for us, where you have, when you're working, and it's mainly driven by the fact that when you're operating with businesses that operate at a certain scale, the efficiencies that you can unlock through AI automation is significantly higher. Uh, um, yeah, and the willingness to pay therefore looks very different. And also the scope for us as a business to deeply embed ourselves as well as sort of expand our revenue with existing clients, that it also increases significantly.
Got it. Often people like are figuring out in the go-to market, like what's the best channel to reach out to customer? Is it events, cold calling, email? What has been some learnings you could share from your
Yeah. So we've learned a lot on this front. It's actually a really interesting space in that regard. And so we met with one, I won't sort of mention his name, but we met one of the, sort of the big names, former era entrepreneurs of the UK within the trade sector, and like an exited founder. And he was very clear on some of the things around the question that you're asking, specifically on the point that trade contractors and tradespeople are being sold to lot. They are being targeted by all sorts of businesses for selling their services and products, everything from suppliers of material to insurance companies to the companies running certification programs, selling you business leads, marketing companies, and so on and so forth. And so you have to navigate within that space. There's quite a bit of noise. Now, with AI, it's become not too difficult to differentiate yourself. Clearly, your proposition is very different to any of those, but nonetheless, it's something that wasn't that obvious to us on day one. The second thing is about LinkedIn. Like it continues to be probably one of the most effective platforms in construction. And the thing about it is you wouldn't really know. In our sort of experience, trade contractors, business owners, directors, they spend a fair amount of time on LinkedIn. They don't necessarily engage with content, but they do consume it. And obviously, because of that behavior, you wouldn't naturally make the conclusion that LinkedIn is a good platform to be on, as you can only see someone else's engagement. So that was something that really stood out. Referrals is a mega theme that you cannot ignore within the sector. Like, I think that hasn't changed for a very long time. In our case, almost all of our business come through referrals and through LinkedIn. We don't do paid marketing at the stage, at least. Referrals is a huge part of where new business is coming from.
this is super insightful. What's the vision for TradeStack 20 beyond?
Yeah, so TradeStack gives trade and construction contractors an AI workforce so they can to run and scale their businesses. And so the long-term vision is for every contractor within our target market to have a set of AI agents, or more specifically, what we call operators, assistants, and experts. And that work gets done far more seamlessly at a much faster pace and a much better quality for these contractors. And we think that there's a huge unlock within the sector awaiting. We think that that productivity curve that has been so often quoted when talking about the sector will see significant gains over the next 5 years. I mean, sometimes our conviction in that is so significant because we see it in reality, the work that we're doing with our clients. The return on investment for them is significant, but more importantly, the impact that they're seeing in their business is really unlike anything they've seen before. You can imagine if you've been used to manual operations for all your life and you've been, say in this for a decade, and all of a sudden this work is being done by an AI operator, it unlocks a huge amount of productivity. We're so convinced in that thesis that sometimes I, I mean, in a joking way, I'm thinking of just starting my own roof or like a trade contracting company because of how big that opportunity is. We think that early adopters of AI in construction tech with solutions like ours, where you have AI operators, assistants, and experts working across your organization from finance, sales, marketing, estimation, compliance, and legal, will unlock mega trade contracting businesses with small head office teams.
Generally, what objections people have with if this is unlocking like productivity at another level, and like people are saying about AI security and other risk.
I think what we've seen in the UK at least is, and I think there's a bit of a lag of the UK on the US, but in 2024 we were very hesitant mentioning the word AI, but in in 2025, we had a stand at one of the UK's largest trade shows for construction, and everyone was talking about AI or wanted to talk about AI. So it's like that barrier of talking about AI has completely been removed. I think that on the point about data security, obviously that should be central to solution providers' approach. You have to respect not just the regulations, but you have to ensure that there's confidence around security and data integrity. When you're working with these businesses and you're automating processes for them and you have AI agents in part driven by probabilistic language models, you have to be able to do that in the context of knowing that you're performing critical tasks related to their operations. So for example, we're helping through the work that we're doing automate payments, automate the reconciliation of payments against invoices, scheduling a whole team of engineers on a daily basis to go into the field to, over the course of a month, serve 5,000 customers for this particular client of ours. If you get it wrong, or you build a user experience that cannot capture a mistake early enough, the impact on their operations can be significant. And so not just I think it's the right thing to do to have data secure. You don't really have a choice when it comes to data integrity because the impact of a mistake can be quite severe for your clients.
I wanted to do a rapid fire where you have like less than 5 seconds to answer and you gotta keep it super
Sure.
brief. So, who's your role model?
Roger Federer.
Your favorite restaurant?
Bosa's is the small place in Wimbledon serving the best wraps.
Your favorite movie?
Top Gun.
3 words your best friend would describe you as.
I think supportive, ambitious.
A city which is in your travel bucket list.
Tokyo.
Best piece of advice you have received till date.
Probably it's a marathon race.
Anything which we didn't cover in this interview and would like to share that message on the closing note?
I think I would just say that this is one big opportunity for entrepreneurs within the construction space, for operators in the construction and trade contracting space. We cannot be more excited about this. And there's been a huge influx of entrepreneurs in this space, and that's been fantastic to see. And yeah, just can't wait what the next 5 to 10 years unfold. And if you're thinking about joining, then think no more. This is one big opportunity.
Best time is now. One last thing. How can people listening or watching support you in your mission? Best way to reach out?
They could just reach out through our website or just Sarel at TradeStack.uk. We'd love to hear from anyone interested in our story, whether you're from a university doing research, whether you're a grad looking for your next role, whether you're professional or potential client, whether you're in the UK or abroad, feel free to reach out.
That's amazing. Pleasure hosting you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Great to be here. Thank you.